Hi there, and welcome to Flip the Script Season 2, Episode 5, Real and Shallow Objections, and how to tell the difference between the two in a season when objections are more real than ever. My name is Beck Holland. I'm the CEO and founder of Flip the Script. Before we jump in, do me one quick favor. Go to flipthescript.co and make sure you download the deck before we jump in so you can follow along at each step of the way. Once you've done that, let's go ahead and start. So why don't we, per usual, start with a little bit of an agenda. As far as our time today, let's bust it up into 6 different pieces. Number 1, how can you tell the difference between a real and shallow objection, especially in a very, very sensitive time right now where people are very, very, let's just say triggered. Number 2, common objections during COVID that are commonly real. So that you kind of have a litmus test and a map of like, okay, what are the things that are commonly real during this time so that I make sure that I'm hypersensitive during this situation. Number 3, what to do when you think they are real. Number 4, what to do when you think they're shallow over call. Number 5, what to do when they're shallow via email. And then I'll give you some examples. So let's start with how you can tell the difference between the two. So how do I tell the difference between a real and shallow objection? I have heard 2 schools of thought on LinkedIn. You have one party that says all your buyers are lying. They're all lying to you. They lie constantly. That's what they're doing. And they're doing it because it's all, about them, et cetera, et cetera. So you need to be ready because they're bad people and they're lying to you. And I've also heard the opposing side of some trainers saying like, oh, well, people aren't lying to you. The objection is real to them. And what was it, 5% of the time that it's real or 10% of the time that it's real? But people are inherently good and they just want to be listened to. In my opinion, neither camp is completely correct, and they both could learn from one another. So whenever you think about how you're selling to someone and whether an objection is real, I want you to stop for a minute, and I want you to think about how you are as a buyer. So in the buying circumstance, there has been circumstances where I was giving an objection and I was telling the complete truth, and I would get mad if someone countered it. And I've also been in the situation where I was giving a shell objection, where I wasn't giving the real objection, and I was telling the little white lie because I was trying to net get out of the situation, but didn't want to feel like a bad person or be offensive. I can actually think of both of those instances in the last week where I've given a false objection and I've given a real objection, false to get out of the situation, and the real objection because I was actually telling the truth. So in my opinion, just based on my own buying behavior and every single person I've ever talked to, is we are the same person, meaning we can do both within our reality in the buying community. So great example of that, Eric Berne, he's the father of transactional analysis. He wrote a great book called Games People Play. And he posited that you have 3 ego states in your body: child ego state, adult ego state, and parent ego state. And that the same person can fluctuate between those ego states within seconds of one another. In one situation, when I say, do not push this button, I'm in child ego state. When I say I'm going to push it instead. And then parent ego state, whenever someone says, like, oh, I'm really having a hard time, and you want to nurture them. So you slip into parent ego state, and they can be seconds away from each other. So, to all the people out there saying that buyers are always lying, in my case, experience, that is not the truth. They're not always lying. Sometimes they're giving you a real, genuine, full-hearted objection. And to all the people out there who are saying that buyers, their reality is the truth and that they're never actually lying and that's real to them. I mean, I can think of a lot of different case scenarios where I'm giving someone a shell objection. I have to go to the bathroom. I'm running into a meeting. I pretend like I'm on the phone with my mom, whenever someone walks up with a clipboard just because I want to get out of the situation. So I think in all things, the moderate view is typically the one with the most merit. So how do I tell the difference between real and shallow objections? Because again, if I counter a real objection, then it already puts me at odds with the prospect and they get upset because they think that I'm lying. But if I don't counter the objections that are shallow, then essentially I'm countering an objection that's not real. And I'm walking from a situation where the person really could have bought based on an objection that they gave me. So how do I tell the difference between the two? So I typically tell the difference between the two through a process in the back end that we'll go through. But this is a good list to start when I start to build my suspicion or my opinion in either case scenario. So number 1, I pay attention to the level of detail in the objection. So more details, the more likelihood that it is a true objection. It is a real objection. So whenever people are doing crime investigation, they typically split up parties and get them to recant the story and how it happened within detail. They ask them a lot of questions. And the reason that they're doing that is the phrase is the devil's in the details. And the theory is that they will catch them in a lie whenever they get them to say a bunch of different facts, and that eventually they'll slip up and they'll say the wrong fact or a fact that doesn't correlate with the other person and what they said. So the more details that the prospect is willing to give you or does give you about a situation, typically the more chance and likelihood that it is a real objection. So number 2 is going to be the temperament of the prospect. Typically, if a prospect is super happy, the happier they are in the process, the more likely, in my experience, that the objection is real. So if you have someone who's really angry or curt or short with you, or a LinkedIn keyboard hero, then they're typically, the objection is not necessarily real. So they're saying no budget, no time, not interested. But if they're really happy and they're like, hey, I really appreciate the outreach, thanks so much for the personalized approach. I actually don't see many reps do that. The truth of the scenario is we have an RFP out for this, but it's not until Q1 of next year. I'd love for you to be involved at that point if you wouldn't mind holding on for now. So number 1, they gave me a lot of details. Number 2, the temperament of the prospect was very positive. So it's more likely that if they're happy and they're kind of giving you this compliment of your outreach, etc., then it's more likelihood that whatever they're saying is truly out of fact and out of a level of detail, and it is after your own good, and it's not to cut you down or squeeze you out of a deal or be mean to you. So number 3, the level of the story behind the objection. So typically if people can give you some kind of story of, in the pre-existing example, if I say not the right time, and I say it's actually not the right time because we have something out in Q1, and there's some level of story of where they are in the decision-making process and how they're evaluating, then the more story that's behind it, the more likelihood that it's real. So I kind of lump this in with number 1 of like the level of detail. So if they're responding with a high level of narrative and a high level of detail to that story that's behind it, there's usually a high likelihood that there is merit to the objection that they're giving to you, and they're telling the truth, because they wouldn't construct that kind of story unless they're malevolent, which very, very few people are. They wouldn't construct that kind of story unless it was absolutely real. Number 4, there is a heightened likelihood if the objection is real, if you're hearing it often. So especially during COVID, some objections that we'll get into later that I'm hearing is, no budget rollbacks, I'm laying off people, I'm pulling out a segment, etc. But if I'm hearing the same objection from a lot of my prospects, especially within a specific segment or within a specific industry or within a specific time period, or, employee bracket, etc., I am starting to categorize the types of objections that I'm getting so I can understand, okay, if prospect just 1 had this objection, it's less likely that it's real than if prospects 1 through 10 all had the exact same objection. So I would wonder about product market fit, TAM, how am I, much less of how am I selling, and is this a fit in general for the people that I'm selling into, in terms of product market fit or the amount of budget that they typically have, so I can understand, if this objection actually has merit to it, because the more people that are saying it, the more likelihood that it's true. And number 5, if they know about your company. If they know about your company or they know about your space, then it's higher likelihood, in my experience, that the objection is true. So if I know who, let's say, Outreach is, they're a great sales engagement platform, et cetera, and I have not bought from them, and you're reaching out to me, and I say, hey, I actually know Outreach already. If I know Outreach already and I haven't bought from them, it's typically going to be for a rooted reason. Either I don't have budget or I don't think my team size is big enough, etc. But usually if they have developed an objection because they have had the time and the luxury of knowing who you are, so they are skipping the education process, they're already educated, and they still haven't bought the software, usually it's going to be for a reason. And so that objection usually has a little bit more merit. Whereas if you're calling into someone cold and they've never heard of you before, then there's a bit of an educational gap. So sometimes they'll say like, hey, no, I don't want any, or no, I don't know, I'm going to pass for now. And you're like, wait, you don't even know what we do. They're like, well, I don't care what you do. Like, essentially, I'm just turning you down. There's a higher likelihood that that's a shallow objection. And really, their real objection is they just want you to go away because they don't want to spend the time on figuring out who you are. Whereas if they already know who you are and they still have an objection, it usually has a little bit more, I'm not going to say merit. There's still sometimes where the objection is not correct, but the objection has more grit and more realness to it if they already know who your company is and your space is and they haven't purchased your software. So now we know how to tell the difference, or telltale signs or leading indicators of the difference. Let's go into common objections that you can keep in your mind that typically are real during COVID, or that I've been hearing amongst the industry and amongst the teams that I've been working with. So here's a short list. Not buying software right now, rolled back budgets, layoffs, spending and hiring freeze, and department restructures. So I have run into each one of these, whether they were mid-sales cycle or whether I was cold prospecting to them in general. But here's just kind of a quick list of give-me's of things that I am hearing in the industry. So again, not saying that it absolutely, 100% is real. If they're giving you this objection, sometimes people say, oh, I'm not buying right now, and it's false, and they don't even know who you are. However, these are very, very common ones during COVID that do have some merit. So I'm not saying any outcome necessarily, but I would say have heightened sensitivity that there is more likelihood that this is real because of what's going on with the pandemic. So number 3, let's say you're in an evaluative process and you think that they are real. So they gave you a high level of detail, their temperament was really great, they already knew who your product was, and they gave you some kind of narrative and story behind it. So you're like, okay, this objection is actually real. In that case scenario, I need you to read the following slide. There is nothing more annoying than a sales rep that counters your real objection. Nothing more annoying. Usually if your prospect is giving you the narrative of a real objection and you counter instead, the one thing that they think is that you are just going to push. And they are not less sure of their objection. They're just more sure that you're not someone that they want to talk to anymore. They think that you're not listening. They think that basically they are doing you a favor whenever they're catching you up on why they can't buy the software right now. So that is a favor that they don't give everyone by default. That sometimes they're like, this was a really great outreach, so I'm going to reward that with giving a little bit of backstory that is real. And if you counter that real objection, it can be very, very damaging. So nothing's irrevocable. A good fall on your sword, accountability, and self-awareness can go a long way. But I will say, I'll give you an example. I was at Nordstrom this weekend, and I was buying some clothes, shoes per normal. And I walk in and I'm like, okay, I am looking for red clothing. I don't know if you noticed, but season 2 is red themed. I hope you did. I put a lot of effort into it. So season 2, nerdy effort too. So season 2, I'm like, okay, I wanted to do red theme. So I was looking for a couple of different red pieces. And I came up to the top floor of Nordstrom's, and basically I saw this shirt and I'm like, I like it, but it's just too much. Just too much, like the whole aesthetic, I just didn't really like it. And instead of the person listening and being like, oh, yeah, that really is too much, like she's telling the truth, she said, no, it's not too much. And I think it's all a matter of perspective, and on and on and on she goes. And I just realized the icks that I got right off the bat. I'm like, wait, I am here to buy, quite a bit of clothing. My objection is not pricing. My objection isn't something hidden. My objection isn't, that I don't want to buy any clothes right now or that I'm window shopping. I'm a very high intent buyer right now, but this shirt was just too much. So what it made me feel like is I'm like, ugh, this person's going to push and they're not going to tell me the truth. And so I don't want to talk to you anymore. I want to shop by myself. So if something is real, you need to bite your tongue and resist the urge to update them that it actually is blah, 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 blah. Because usually if you're diagnostic about what that blah, blah, blah is, it's a reason to buy the product because you are quoted on commission. Typically, at least in my experience, when I wonder and am very introspective about why I'm pushing a certain agenda, it's because usually it's advantageous to me sometimes at the expense of the person that I'm pushing it on. So you want to have heightened security or heightened awareness whenever you are dealing with a objection or talking to someone who has an objection that you do think is real through their level of detail, etc. So the 4 things that I would do is, number 1, I would ask questions out of curiosity without agenda. This is one of the hardest things to do, or at least it is for me, of like, I want to put my agenda aside. So let's say in that same case scenario, I walk up to Nordstrom's and I'm like, this is too much. A great question could have been, what do you mean by too much? And I could have gone through, like, oh, well, it's just a little bit too loud. I feel like it's too casual, et cetera, et cetera. I'd rather wear these very awesome Champion hoodies or sweatshirts in my shoot. So I would ask questions out of genuine curiosity of like, hey, I just want to understand a little bit more about this. And I'd be I would decode my brain to be asking questions with the sole goal of wanting the information, not to get an outcome or an agenda that I have underneath. So that's number 1. Number 2, I would seek to be empathetic. Empathy is defined as the ability to enter into the understanding or feelings, thoughts of another. So there are 2 types of empathy. For a quick book on this, it's really great. If you want to read a counterculture book, Against Empathy by Paul Bloom, he goes into the 2 different types of empathy. There's cognitive and emotional. Cognitive is you understand the perspective of another, but you aren't emotionally entering in. But emotional empathy is you're entering into the experience. So think when you see someone hit their nail, or their fingernail or finger with an actual hammer, and you wince out of pain. So you have entered into emotional empathy at that point if you are identifying with the person and their perspective, whereas cognitive empathy is basically you can understand their perspective, but you aren't really affected by it. So in terms of empathy, I would always seek to, at minimum, I would say the great mix. Paul Bloom suggests that emotional empathy is damaging, but the great mix is cognitive empathy, that you can really put your prejudice down and your thought scope down of what you really want to be achieved and understand from this person's perspective, why would they think that shirt's too much? And can I enter into their experience so I can get to know their mindset so I can make decisions accordingly, build advocacy, and ultimate trust and rapport with my buyer. So if it's not a buyer today, in no case scenario would I have bought that shirt. However, she could have won me over long term to where I wanted to return to that Nordstrom and buy more clothes from her. So, and this was, I hope no one ever knows who she is because she actually was really sweet. But, we all do this. We all do this whenever we're selling, especially in the nascent stages of our career. So I would want to be empathetic to the person and enter their understanding of what they're after and what they're trying to avoid. Number 3, I would say that you understand. If this is a real objection, I would say completely understand, and I would mean it. If it's a real objection, you need to say you understand and fake it till you make it, and then actually mean it. The more you mean it, the better. I've heard a lot of reps counter by saying, they'll say like, I'm actually running into a meeting, and I really am. And they're like, yeah, but just can I, and I'm like, bam! I'm like, I just want to throw my phone at the wall. So it's like, if that objection is real, instead of saying like, okay, yeah, but quick bit, let me, it's like, hang up the phone. Sorry, I called you. Hang up the phone. Call back later. Don't ask for a time, etc. I would just say you understand to the real objection. Someone says, hey, I just pulled out 200 people from layoffs. Now's not the time. I would say, oh my gosh, sorry to hear that. Completely understand. Let me know if I can ever be of any help. It'll shock them. I will give you an example of a time that I royally messed this up. There was a company when I was with my first MarTech company where I was calling into them and I said, hey, like blah, 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 typical value prop, here's back, pushing her self-righteous monologue software. And basically I come in and I'm like, hey, did you know that you blah, 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 blah? The person says, now's not the right time. I didn't do any research on the company. And I'm like, no, but typically blah, 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 blah. And I came back in with my value prop harder. And I'll never forget this guy's tone. He says, Beck, I don't know if you've looked at the news recently. It was an enterprise company. I don't know if you looked at the news recently, but we just laid off 2,000 people. 200 of them were on my team. Now's not the right time. And I was like, oh my gosh. That guy in that moment, I mean, I tried to recover. I'm like, I'm so sorry. But he's like, oh, you shouldn't need to have that level of detail from me. I don't owe you the background or the excuse. That is a luxury. And so if someone says a real objection, and if you have an inkling that it is real based on your instinct, you're smart, right? So I would say, hey, totally understand. I'm out. Like, call me if you ever need me. And I would back off and I would mean it. Number 4, I would send them some kind of personal nurturing thing. So, imagine that case scenario where they say, I just laid off some people. Like, now it's not the right time. I would say, hey, no problem. I understand. Sorry to hear that. Let me know if I can ever be of any help. And in the meantime, I would play the long-term game. I would send them nurturing things that basically add value to their day, regardless of whether they have money, budget, authority, etc. right now or not. Sales, regardless of what industry and regardless of what company size, etc., is a long-term game. I cannot say this enough. Companies are not interdependent of one another, especially with social media and especially within tech and especially within B2B SaaS tech. So it's like, okay, people talk and they talk about their experience working with you, employing you, being employed by you, working with you, underneath you, working over you, etc. And so when you're selling, you always want to sell with integrity because you will start to develop, the great news in that, a very positive relationship or reputation about you as a seller. So even if they have a real objection now, it doesn't mean that that objection is real forever. So I'd say in the meantime, if they have an objection like that they just laid off 200 people, you need to, make their life a little better. Put a smile on their face or try to add some value. No, there's not quote unquote something in it for you, but even if you are after what's in it for you solely, long term, that is how to sell. So ask Gary Vaynerchuk. He makes posts about this all the time, of that not only is it a long-term game, but you want to seek to be high character at all stages of the game. So you want to send over some kind of nurturing, material that could help them in the long term and in the meantime, with no agenda, a couple of tips, low investment from them, free. Doesn't relate back to your product, etc. But basically something that they can have that is interdependent. They don't have to sign over X, Y, and Z to get it. A great episode on things, examples of that is season 2, episode 8 of Flip the Script. I go into all different kinds of examples, but I basically would say, I'm going to ask questions out of curiosity so I can get the real story without an agenda and not to be pushy. I'm going to be empathetic and understand their world and their role and their place within that world as best as I can possible and enter into that experience. I want to say that I understand to the real objection and completely back off and mean it. And I want to send them nurturing things in the meantime. So I've seen a lot of buyers turn around very quickly whenever I led with this kind of playbook. And all of a sudden, they didn't want to buy from me last week, but all of a sudden budget unfroze somehow within the next week, because if I had to guess, it's because of that I had learned from my mistakes with that original company and I was learning to sell like this. So number 4, that's for objections that are real. So let's talk about being shallow, y'all. So number 4, what to say when you suspect that this objection is shallow when you're over a cold call. So I have a 4-step process. Here's a couple of shallow objections that are typically shallow, not necessarily always, but typically shallow. Not interested, running into a meeting and took this call because I thought you were somebody else, and send me an email. Especially if they say running into a meeting, I check the time. If it's 2:38, it is probably a shallow objection because no one has a meeting that starts at 2:39. But if you have a suspicion that this is a shallow objection and this is a quote-unquote blow-off, which we are all quote-unquote guilty of doing, number 1, I would start with a pattern interrupt. So for more on pattern interrupts, go to Silver Bullet Central, and I have a whole session on all the different kind of pattern interrupts you can do. But they would say, hey, Beck, I'm running into a meeting. I'd say, can I level with you? I've been hearing send me an email from a lot of people recently. Step number 2, I would do what I call elephant in the room. I'd call out what I actually think I am reading between the lines is happening. I'd say, and I'm getting the feeling that that's just your polite way of saying, go away, you annoying sales rep. Did I get that right? You'll hear them, in some cases, laugh and be like, yeah, you did. Or you'll hear people say, no, you didn't. I actually am running into a meeting X, Y, and Z, and we can talk about the 2 talk tracks from there. But I'd say, I'm getting the feeling it's your polite way of saying, go away, you annoying sales rep. Did I get that right? If they say yes, You did? Then I'd say, I get it, no problem. I say the exact same thing whenever people walk me up to me with a clipboard. I turn into an animal. So I lead with empathy and the understanding of they did what they did because they're a normal person, you do that all the time too. And then I would close with a prospect pack. You have now shattered through that seller mentality of they're thinking that you're the other car and you're the bad guy, and now you're human to them because you called out what they were really saying between the lines. So now you want to frame up your time and go for, what you wanted to originally call for. So I would do that through a prospect pact is what I call it. There are 4 different pieces to a prospect pack. Number 1, commitment. Number 2, agenda. 3, outcome. And 4, consent. But basically you're trying to outline what's going to happen to someone because they are scared of something that's around the corner. We are scared of the unknown. So you want to outline to your prospect the 2 different pieces of, you want to really strike up a barter with your prospect. This is what's going to happen. So the commitment is you give me the next 20 seconds. This is an example of a prospect pack that I use pretty frequently. Number 2, the agenda, to give you my best dog and pony show on, let's use Vendition. Who Vendition is and why I thought we might be a good fit for you and your team over at Okta. Number 3, you want to state the outcome of that 20 seconds. At the end of that 20 seconds, you can tell me whether it makes sense to continue the conversation from there. And then number 4, you want to ask for consent or permission with your prospect. So the word I'll use today is deal. So from the top, someone says, I'm running into a meeting. And you'd say, hey, can I level with you? I've been hearing I'm running into a meeting a lot recently, and I'm getting the feeling that's just your polite way of saying, go away, you annoying sales rep. Did I get that right? They'll say, yeah, you did. Busted. I'd be like, no problem. I do that all the time. I do it all the time whenever someone approaches me with a clipboard. How about this? You give me the next 20 seconds to give you my best dog and pony show on who Vendition is and why I thought we might be a good fit for you and your company over at PagerDuty. And at the end of that 20 seconds, you can tell me whether it makes sense to continue the conversation from there. That a deal? So that's how I would shatter through with shallow objections that you think are shallow. So at that hook, whenever you say, did I get that right? And you're looking for confirmation. So over here at the elephant in the room, you will hear one of 2 responses. So I want to give you as promised, a talk track for both. If they say, yes, that is correct, that's what I was doing, I would go ahead and do exactly what we just did with the prospect pact. You want to give them your elevator pitch, right? So you said, I get it. How about this? You give me the next 20 seconds, etc. At that hook, sometimes you will hear, no, I actually really don't have any budget, or I actually really am not interested, or I actually really am running into a meeting, and they're confirming their original objection. In that case, I would go back to slide 9 where I talk about, no, this objection's real. So essentially, this 4-step process is not necessarily that you are positive that this objection is shallow. This is a pattern, fancy pattern interrupt to understand whether the objection is real or not. If the objection is real, no problem. They'll say like, no, I actually am running into a meeting, and be like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I just have been hearing that a lot recently. Go into your meeting, talk to you later. Or, they say like, no, I actually really don't have any budget right now because of COVID, you big jerk. And I'd be like, I'm so sorry. I just have been hearing that too much recently. Totally understand. It's nice speaking with you. And I'm really sorry to hear about everything going on. But if they admit to it, most of the people you're going to get high likelihood that they're going to say, yes, that's correct. And at that point, you can go into your elevator pitch with the prospect pack. So now let's talk about how to counter, so to speak, shallow objections when you suspect they're shallow over email, and then we'll close out with some examples. Over email, here's the 3 most common: not interested, not the right timing, and no thank you. They probably won't tell you over email that they're running into a meeting. I mean, I'm never going to say never, but I haven't seen it happen. They just won't respond. I would call 3 times at that point to the person, and I would say to everyone who says, let me classic roll the fuse here. Everyone who says like, hey, calling 3 times is too many. I want you to think on from your buyer's hat. When a number calls me that I don't know, I'll let it roll to voicemail, and I'm like, oh, I have no idea who that person is. So I would maybe space out the timing. You don't want to call back to back to back to back to back, but I would say, okay, there is a shelf life on this objection. So I have till really the end of the day before this comes obsolete, max the next day, to really talk to this person about the objection they just sent over. Otherwise, they're going to not remember what I'm talking about, and I'm completely coming in out of the blue. So people, average retention rate is 15%, just so you know, no matter what you're talking about. So I would call 3 times that day. And if they pick up, I would say, hi, George. This is Beck. I'm the annoying rep who just keeps sending you emails. I'll go, oh, hey, Beck, how are you? I'll go, great. Well, not so great. I actually just got your email where you told me you weren't interested. I don't know. George, I've been, getting not interested a lot over email recently. And I get the feeling it's just because I'm not that great at my job. And it's your polite way of saying, go away, you annoying sales rep. Did I get that right? And George will either say yes or no. If he says, no, that's not right, we actually X, Y, and Z, then you back off because it's real. And if it was a shall objection, you shatter through and go through to your prospect pack. If they don't answer, then you don't have a lot left. You want to use a fall on your sword email. Full disclosure, countering over email is much tougher than on the phone, because on the phone, there's less room to come up with stuff because they don't have time to think. So they'll more so admit the real story. So, I want to hit on this before I go into this follow-up email. They're not bad people. The reason they're coming up with all of these tales is because of how pushy we've been. So I understand it from both sides. We have a quota, we have to make numbers, etc. But the reason so I walk into, a Gap to go buy jeans, and someone walks up and goes, can I help you today? And my whole body shrivels is not because I think that person is bad. It's because I have been hammered and experience with people walking up to me, not only wanting to try to find that best pair of jeans, but to try to find 5 pair of jeans that I don't need and didn't come into purchase because they're quoted on how many jeans that they sell. So our prospects are not bad people, but they have been trained to avoid, be elusive to salespeople because of how the entire selling industry has gone about it. So, I'm not going to necessarily blame anyone, and I certainly don't think it's necessarily our fault. But our prospects, that's why they're kicking out these statements, is not because they're a bad person, but because they've been trained that we're going to be agenda driven and be after our own goals at the expense oftentimes of them. So fall on your sword email. If they don't pick up those 3 times over that day, and you call them a few times the next day, and they don't pick up, I would send over an email, and you're trying to elicit some type of response by being agendaless and also very, very self-aware. So step number 1, I would say, no worries, I won't send you any more messages. Number 2, I really hope I didn't overstep my bounds here. Number 3, I would value add without an agenda. Given your company size, I thought you might like this article, by the way, on scaling teams effectively. Number 4, I'm so excited. In either case scenario, I'm so excited about where, Coca-Cola is heading. And number 5, I would hard walk out. Let me know if I can ever be of any support to you or your team. So in this case scenario, you're really just trying to salvage the long-term game, and this will more often elicit a response and a positive response, and they might come back in and buy from you, a couple of weeks later. Whereas I very, very rarely see it convert, if you're being too aggressive and pushing, et cetera. If it's a real objection, then you need to back off and you need to give them the room to breathe, but you also need to be properly persistent, right? So fall on your sword email, in my experience, elicits very high percentage of response and the right type of response, at least emotionally. So it's like, okay, if they can buy, they will give you the chance. So let's give a couple examples, then we'll close out. So examples of real versus shallow. Let's start with budget. Real. Real or not real, people? Let's play a game show. Sorry, I have been in the studio for a while. Starting to feel like Tom Hanks on Castaway, where he names his volleyball and that's his best friend. Budget. Real. We just had to lay off 200 people and consolidate everything going into Q3. I wish we had the chance to buy software like this, but we just don't have the cash. High likelihood of real. A lot of level of detail, big narrative behind it. They are nice to you. I wish that we had the chance to buy software like this. I'd say very high likelihood that this is a real objection. Shallow, no budget. We don't have budget. No detail, not nice, no narrative. Doesn't mean that it is shallow, but it means it's high likelihood that it's shallow. And this doesn't mean that it is real, but high likelihood that it's real. Let's do timing and then close out. Timing, real. Real or not real, sorry. Timing, real. Not a great time, but will be coming up. We have an RFP out for this in November. We're looking to expand and happy to get you involved at that point if you'd like. High likelihood that it's real. Not only are they willing to help you, but they're willing to, they're telling you some kind of narrative. There is an RFP. It's not never. It's just not now. And their temperament seems to be, pretty nice. Timing, shallow. I don't have any time for this. Someone goes, I don't have any time for this. I'd be like, can I be at level with you? I've been getting the feeling, and you're going off on your shallow objection counter. So there's the difference between the two examples, just to give you some perspective or some example. So in summary, objections are tricky. They're really, really tricky because we are both the victim and the villain. We are both the hero, we are the protagonist and the antagonist in most situations. Like, we've done both, and sometimes they can be seconds away from each other. So we do this as a buyer, so we just need to be able to read this as a seller and understand that this is a real objection. I'm going to hands off, be respectful, send over nurturing. And if this is what I think is a shallow objection, I'm going to pattern interrupt, counter, understand if it's real. If it's real, throw it in bucket one. And if it's not real, then say like, hey, I understand I'd do it too, but here's what I called for, and then I can get out of your hair. So I think that there is a very, very real case scenario that we can be more monomaniacal about understanding our buyer's tone, take off our sales ears and put back on our human ears and say like, okay, I'm going to take everything as a clue as to how this person is feeling, and how can I be very, very respectful and back off if the objection is real, especially during a time like COVID. But if it's shallow, have a little fun, play with it, and try to counter by pattern interrupting to get down to the truth. Woo! So that is everything. Thanks so much, everybody, for watching. If you like this session and you want to hear more, go to flipthescript.co and make sure you watch a whole bunch of different sales topics that we have just like this one. If you really love this session, go to Flip the Script on LinkedIn, give us a follow, tag me in your top 2 takeaways so I know what you want to hear more of. But either way, hope you have a great rest of your day.